Hello, what's up? This ends up being a little bit of a clusterfuck. It's supposed to be about the West Coast Pop Art Experimental Band Volume 3, which is how I started this video, which you will see. As I've done in the past with these Acid Archives Diaries, and this is an Acid Archives Diaries video, sometimes I go to do the record and I realize, oh my god, it's not in the Acid Archives. Sometimes a lot of the major label stuff they didn't include, like the bigger mainstream, more major label stuff they didn't put in the Acid Archives, unless it was more obscure and harder to find. So these are pretty easy to find. They made enough of these that they're relatively easy to find. This is Volume 3, West Coast Pop Art Experimental Band, Child's Guide to Good and Evil. I really wanted to dive deeper into this record. It's considered many people's favorite, but it's not in the Acid Archives. So what you're going to see is me talk about this record, realize this is the only proper West Coast Pop Art Experimental Band record that is in the book. This is a reproduction bootleg, was very rare. The very first album, Volume 1, or Part 1. No, it's Volume 1, then we have Part 1 and Volume 2. Anyway, this is in very rarely, seldomly seen private press, but this is the reissue bootleg. So I pivot to talk about this, because this is in the Acid Archives. And then I figured, well, the only other record that is by the West Coast Pop Art Experimental Band in the Acid Archives is this, Markley, a Group. This is that band, except it's credited to Bob Markley, the trickster, sort of charlatan that really took control of this band that we'll talk about. So then I talk about this record too. So you get 3 for the price of 1 on this video coming up. As I said, these 2 are the only ones in the Acid Archives. It was started to do this, but it's not in there. So, introduction time over. Enjoy the Acid Archives Diaries.
For the fox and the owl, for smooth stones, and a safe place to hide in the hills near your home. Now you walk with bare feet.
Alright, we're going to talk about a record from a band. I would love to talk about more from this band, but I decided to go with this one because it's always maybe looked at as maybe their best record, and maybe their most misunderstood, sort of their most controversial perhaps. But I love this band. We could talk about a lot of their records, but we're going to talk about Volume 3 today of the West Coast Pop Art Experimental Band, A Child's Guide to Good and Evil, on Reprise, their last record for Reprise.
As the world rises and falls, as the world rises and falls, as the world rises and falls.
Alright, as I said in my last video, well, this will start in a minute, but I still don't have my turntable ready, waiting for a turntable stylus, at least at the time of this recording. So we're listening to my cassette of Sam Gendel and Emile Mossieri's Hardy Boys, a record I ended up getting as well on the 12-inch format, but bought the tape initially. So that's what we're hearing. But we're talking about 1968, the third LP, actually fourth LP by the West Coast Pop Art Experimental Band, a group led by this guy, unfortunately, Bob Markley, a rich sort of LA scenester who was 10, 15 years, maybe 10, at least 10 years older than everyone else in the band, who had money and connections and was able to get them gear and gigs, but he was not talented at all. He was the lyricist and a lot of the times the conceptual artist, although he's really a creepy dude. He was interested in young girls, young women, maybe even underage girls. I don't really know the history of that. He sort of faded from the view later on and wasn't heard from again. But I think he definitely, unfortunately, was into some fucked up shit. But we're talking about the band now. It was initially led by Michael Lloyd, Sean Harris, and Danny Harris. Michael Lloyd would go on to become a huge producer, big time in the 60s and later too. But Sean Harris, and then here with Ron Morgan, I guess Danny Harris would leave, his brother, but Ron Morgan, the guitar player, would be around for a bunch, including this record. Now, the compositions were mainly, music was Ron and Sean, but Bob Markley is really the one who was like taking credit for all this stuff, and he was the one sort of putting these lyrics, the lyricist a lot of the times, even though Sean would, I think, actually mostly sing the lyrics. They were Bob's creation, they were Bob's writings. Sometimes Bob would do the voiceover thing. He couldn't sing. I think he played tambourine and not very well. But Sean Harris wrote the music mainly with Ron Morgan, the guitar player. And yeah, sometimes he'd be singing these really gross lyrics. Yeah, like they have a track, which I guess these are not even in the right order. 18 is Over the Hill. There's always track names like that in a lot of these records, and that's all Bob Markley. Produced by Jimmy Bowen with Markley. This has some of their most conceptual fare, has some of their most interesting stylistic shifts. I don't know if this is my favorite, but it's excellent. It's certainly survived the purge, and it's the last, as I said, for Reprise Records. Their fourth record, Volume, it's confusing. You have Volume 1, which is the rare FIFO LP from 66. It's an incredibly rare record. Could probably sell for 5 figures if it comes up. Has like only a handful of actual copies and actual art sleeves. Some of it is in generic sleeves if they've been found. Then you had Part 1, which is the first Reprise album, which has like Smell of Incense on it and I Won't Hurt You. Then it goes back to Volume 2, the other black cover, and then here, Volume 3. So a little bit weird. They were, again, fighting against themselves to find success. This has psych folk moments. This has like Birds Like or Sweetheart of the Rodeo style or Flying Burrito Brothers sort of fried Americana, country rock on this. There's like innocent sort of like psych folk meandering, and a lot of it does center around this concept of loss of innocence for young people or young girls and young people, I guess, overall. A child of a few hours is burning to death. There were certainly war themes. The anniversary of World War III. So they were trying to be political, maybe a little bit clumsily done. But Our Drummer Always Plays in the Nude. Really unfortunate track, that one. But musically, what Sean was doing was always really pretty top notch, I think. And this is excellent. Although you just have to overlook, if you can, the Markley shadiness. Of course, he would continue to further take over the band, calling the shots somehow. He was responsible for getting them notoriety and marketing them, so he does deserve some credit, but he was also the downfall. And this is one I would like to actually upgrade the cover if I can. It's hard to find this one in nice shape, and this one has kind of been one of their most in-demand records, I think. Sean Harris and Ron Morgan at this point. Michael Lloyd would come back later. No one knows why exactly, but Lloyd or Sean Harris composing, writing the songs, writing the music, Ron Morgan contributing that really great, spindly, spidery, psychedelic guitar. Excellently done, I think. After this, they would go on to make a record that I used to have it sold, called Where's My Daddy? Not very good, kind of a hard rock album, but here they're still sort of in that psych mode for 68, very much so. And it's got some really sort of mysterious parts to it. Good psychedelia here, with some good acid folk happening, and some definite tape splicing, sort of experimentation in the studio. So nice record, really nice actually. One I thought maybe I didn't like as much as I did because I thought there's a little hype around it, but as I come back to it and listen again, it does stick with me, even if I can avoid and ignore the Markley stuff. Now, I did consult my compendium, my annual number 2 of Shindig, which includes the long story about the West Coast Pop Art Experimental Band, which came in individual issues, and then they compiled it here. I used to have the individual issues, but this is kind of the be-all, end-all of the band. It gives you all of the backstory, detailed notes on each record. There's Markley in the middle. And the other guys are so much younger. So there's a good little bit of information about Volume 3, Child's Guide. Here's information about Volume 2. Here's an ad with Markley. Real sketch. It talks about their whole career, really. Even their post West Coast pop art careers. The Sean Harris solo record. Yeah, I think it does talk about Markley's final days. Oh yeah, there's a long article. I'll have to read the whole thing again. There he is in his hipster days. So it was cool to consult that. One of the big names that first got me into when I was first sort of digging into like anything past like, you know, Hendrix and Pink Floyd and even the 13th Floor Elevators, one of the next bands I would discover was West Coast Pop Art Experimental Band. Don't even know how. So let's consult the Acid Archives. 1968. All right, 124. Wooden Elephant. Gary Wilson. Bill Wilson. Wilcox, Sullivan Wilcox, the one I've been hearing about a lot lately. White Lightning. David Welsh. I went too far. Okay. West Coast Pop Art Experimental Band. Okay, so I've done this Acid Archives, but it's actually not in the book. Only part 1 is 1966, the incredibly rare record, so I just assumed and forgot to check. This is why you check. But, yeah, they give that one a rarity 4. I'll just read you the Lundborg entry on that. This is the scoop collector's dream of a previously unknown early LP by a major 60s group. Only a dozen or so originals have ever been found, and even a sleeveless copy goes for $1,500, which I think would be way more now, while a copy with sleeve has sold for not less than $15,000. First hints of this existence came via the odd, legendary unreleased album Issue from the band themselves, which unfortunately excludes some of the best tracks, although it does include some obscure 45-only tracks. There was also a magazine article around 1981 where the discovery was announced, but it wasn't until the 1990s that people really became aware of the FIFO album. The music is dominated by crude Sunset Strips folk garage cover versions, with some psyche moves added via early versions of 2 tracks from their fabulous Reprise debut. One of my all-time favorite groups. This is mandatory for West Coast Pop Art Experimental Band fans, though admittedly not as outstanding and mature as their later albums. There was a FIFO 45 with a non-album LP's B-side, Sassafras. After being taken under the bizarre wings of Bob Markley, the young band followed this debut with an outstanding run at Reprise, including a couple of all-time classic psych LPs. But anyone reading this is likely to know those already. There's a shot of the rare 45. I'll show you a reproduction, a bootleg, essentially, of the FIFO album I showed when we were talking about the Psych Purge, but here it is. This is what the original cover looks like. Like I said, there's only a handful of known copies. And this has got I Won't Hurt You on it, If You Want This Love, both from the debut Reprise album Part 1. This is Volume 1. And this has got covers like I Won't Hurt You, or I'm sorry, the You Really Got Me is awesome. Baby Blue is great. Like, the covers on this are excellent. Meaning this bootleg pressing should be findable. It's got plain black labels, so this is the only one that's in the Acid Archives diary. So we did this one, I guess, but we also talked about Child's Guide. We talked about the band in general. If you can find the article compiled here, the original Shindig article I think was in 3 different volumes of the magazine, but it's all here. This also includes the San Francisco Scene, Moby Grape, Tyrannosaurus Rex, Dukes of Stratosphere, the Youngbloods, the Charlatans, and Gary Walker, and The Rain. This is, God, I don't know how old this is. This is number 2, the compendium volume. But there it is. I guess we did another one, Acid Archives Diaries, talking about the West Coast Pop Art Experimental Band. And we need to talk about Markley, a group. It's the same band, except it's covered, or it's credited to this guy. Ugh. And it's on the Forward Records group label, I should say.
his chair, grounded at home, left all alone with no place to go. Soon some Saturday when she gets away, we'll walk through other people's minds.
I want to cover the 1969 album by the Markley's A Group, with Bob Markley and the two Harris brothers, who were the main sort of collaborators and songwriters for West Coast Pop Art Experimental Band, although this guy gets most of the credit. These two guys are really the dudes, really doing it, as long as with Ron Morgan, who doesn't appear on this one. But interestingly enough, we have Michael Lloyd, who was, at this point, he was on the very first Volume 1, as I talked about, West Coast Pop Art Experimental Band record. He had a falling out with Bob Markley, and then he went on to become a producer. He fell in with Mike Curb, who founded, just based on the label, a bunch of different productions. Mike Curb would go on to form Curb Records later on, but I believe Forward Records might have been his. This is in all but name a West Coast Pop Art Experimental Band record. Bob Markley took control of the group, was slowly became his thing, even though he wasn't by any means the most talented in the band. He was the one writing a lot of the lyrics. Some lyrics were pretty cool, a lot of it creepy, a lot of it really outdated, and he had some really older guy sort of complex, like he was trying to be cool and like hip like the young kids, but he really couldn't. He couldn't play any instruments. He could barely play a tambourine, but he was connected and he had money. He was associated with, as I said, Michael Lloyd. He was down. He was like in the Hollywood scene, Bob Markley. But this record, they brought back Michael Lloyd, who had a giant conflict with Markley, but somehow he returned, and they made this record, signed to Forward Records, and it's really good. We're listening to Next Plane to the Sun. It started with Booker T and Electric Shock. I really love Elegant Ellen. There's some really great sort of mournful, sort of almost wistful, folky psychedelic music on this. Some really great moments. It's really one of their best records, in fact. And I don't know why the band members didn't try to fight. I think at this point they were pretty resigned to just let this guy do what he wanted to do. And he said he basically owned all the publishing, Markley. And he's like, no one cares about this band name. We're going to call it Markley, a group. And people cared even less about that. But this is kind of a harder one to find. It's been bootlegged. There's a different Forward issue that has a different label design. It's absolutely unofficial. And this is sort of maybe even their best record. It's hard to say. A lot of the records are uneven. There's a lot of great moments, and then some lesser moments, more awkwardness, and psychedelic gone wrong by this guy. But this one's really consistent the whole way through. It borders on folk rock and rock, but it's got that general sort of haziness, uneasiness quality that a lot of their music has. By the way, Kim Fowley is what I was thinking of. Markley was certainly down with Kim Fowley, and the two of them were problematic themselves. But he, like I said, he was connected. He knew how to get the band sort of attention. He got them the Reprise deal. He did things for the band and progressed them, but the band was ultimately not very successful. So he was simultaneously bringing them forward and bringing them down. The whole story of the band is mentioned in the Shindig compendium here. It was a 3-part article, but it's all compiled in this sort of retrospective Shindig, the great psychedelic magazine. And there's a whole section about this record, Markley, a group. It talks about where they were at the time. Mike Curb and Michael Lloyd, it was MGM Records and from the Verve label group that Curb became president and appointed Michael Lloyd vice president of A&R at the age of 20. So he was behind a lot of big stuff, and he comes back to help him with Markley, a group. And it's really, like I said, one of their strongest efforts. It's got the ladies on the cover, of course. And the Harris brothers, Sean and Dan. Now, I guess apparently Sean was less involved in this one. Dan had a bigger songwriting role. Sean did some vocals. But Michael Lloyd is the producer here. It's credited to Bob Markley and Michael Lloyd, but just consider Michael Lloyd the real producer. So a strong one from 1969. The final, that would be it. There's a whole post story to this band about what they would go to do after. Sean Harris did a solo record. Bob Markley went down weirder paths, and no one really knows what happened with him exactly. But this is a band that should be, they get enough attention because they had the Reprise label, and they're kind of one of the earlier bands you discover with psychedelic rock. They kind of have their lovers and haters, and like I said, there's weak points to some of those Reprise records, even though I enjoy all of them, and they all survived my psych purge. But only one record is in the Acid Archives Diaries from a West Coast pop art experimental band moniker. Only that one, which was my mistake going into this. However, Markley, a group, is in there because it's on a smaller label, I guess. So let's read it and wrap up the Acid Archives for West Coast pop art experimental band. Always hard to say it, and there's no good way to abbreviate it. Okay, Markley, a group, Los Angeles, California, 1969. Forward. Rarity 1. Doesn't even show the cover here, it just shows stupid Markley and his early, single that was on Warner Brothers. So it's a pretty short entry. I may be in the minority here, this is Aaron Malinsky, but I enjoy this as much as any of the proper West Coast pop art experimental band albums, as it's full of left turns, crazy arrangements, freaky lyrics, and catchy tunes. As with the first Reprise album, it sounds like a killer garage pop album filtered through the mind of a whacked out genius. Absolutely a must-hear for pop psych fans. I will not call this guy Markley a whacked out genius. I think he was a bit of a charlatan. And to give him some credit, he had some very much timely or scene-centric lyrics that some of them aged okay, some of them did not. This is the song I really like here, Elegant Ellen, credited to Danny Harris and Bob Markley. Markley gets all the songwriting credit, but he's not a musician. He's not songwriting. He's just doing some lyrics. So he doesn't play any instruments. So this guy totally held this band back. He should have gotten them the contract and then stepped aside and let the pros do what they were doing, because they were good and talented, the Harris brothers, Ron Morgan. There's other people involved. This story in Shindig tells the whole thing. But anyway, that's Markley, a group from 1969. Hope you enjoyed. Hope all of the West Coast pop art experimental band that's in this video. That's kind of all there is to talk about when it comes to the Acid Archives. And this has been the Acid Archives Diaries.